Hi, everyone. I'm here with my friend James, and we're just going to have an interesting discussion about the universe and the laws of the cosmos, astrology, some occult stuff, whatever just sort of comes to our minds. And so, yeah, it's just going to be a free flow, and hopefully, it'll be well. I have no doubt that it'll be really interesting and awesome and epic. So, thanks for joining me, James. Good to have you. How's it going?
Thank you, Lars. It's going well. I'm just here in San Diego and really excited about, I don't know, everything we're going to talk about, which we don't really know what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure it's going to be fun either way.
Yeah.
So,
It's the great mystery.
yeah, it's always better, I think, in some ways. There's a time and a place for both, right? It's that kind of like that
Yeah.
Pisces Virgo axis where it's like, go with the flow or create structure and have an intended flow. But we're just going with the flow because I'm very Pisces and that works
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I also have a Pisces moon myself, and so I think it's always very liberating for me to just kind of let things happen in that Pisces free flow manner. I was sitting outside the acequia where I live, which for for people tuning in that don't know, an acequia is like this man-made ditch that carries like the river water, and then you can like divert it for farming purposes and stuff. And I was just like sitting there watching it after I had lowered this or raised this gate to let the water flow more, which was kind of taxing, but I liked the experience because it just felt very real. It felt like meditative and felt real rather than just like pressing a button and some
Yeah.
something doing it for me. But like after the water was able to get through, it was like really quiet and peaceful, and so I just sat watching it for 5-10 minutes, and I was just observing how like the water is like the true nature of mind, where it's like always flowing, and it it like you see these ripples happen in it, and those are like our thoughts, but in the water that's free flowing, those thoughts come and then they just go like naturally. But then the next day I went out, and like that same area, there some like sticks and logs and things had fallen in, and it was so interesting because at first I thought, oh, it's obstructing the water, but actually it wasn't. What was happening instead is like the water is still going around that stuff. The water's like a very patient entity. It's just going around it. And instead, what's getting caught in that is like these little seed pods. So I started to think like, yeah, that's like us as human beings. Like it's not really our mind that gets obstructed. It's the stuff that gets caught in our mind that creates the illusion of obstruction.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, it's our attachment to any specific thing or any specific thought or identity. There was a conversation on Twitter, I think it was the other day, and some people were discussing identity and what identity is, and they were actually discussing the idea of like gender and then someone speaking about how they didn't really believe in gender binary, and I
Okay.
really agreed with that too because I was thinking about how identity itself is formed as an encapsulation of a definition. So every time we define something, we encapsulate it as part of our identity. It's like
Right.
the glyph of the sun with the circle and
The dot.
the dot in the center, and how that speaks to human sense of identification and how we create that identity when we encapsulate any idea with a definition, when we define things. And
Sure.
so that's what I thought of whenever you were speaking about this flow of mind. And
Cool.
also, I was thinking about our emotions, and this idea that came to me one day when I was meditating was that our thoughts are actually just our emotions vibrating within us,
Right.
and it's the energy of our emotions that create a resonance within us that produce this idea of thought. And so anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
So I
sure.
mean, I totally see the inspiration of what you're saying.
Yeah, cool. And but it was, yeah, it was so interesting how, like, at first I thought that those logs were obstructing the flow of the water. And I guess in a sense you could say they were, but it really seemed more like that they were just obstructing these seed pods that were floating in the water, and that the water just had no problem going around and over and under this log, you know? And so
Right.
that's just another beautiful metaphor where, like, we think that the obstacles or we think certain things in our life are obstacles, right? And then we think that they're obstructing us, and so we, instead of going around, right, we start to become identified with those seed pods, which are kind of like
Hmm.
the thoughts around what that log is, the identification, that the labels of, like, this log is this, right? Like,
Well,
and we
right.
people too, of course, with gender, like you're saying, like, you're this gender, and, like, that's it. But then, do we ever ask the question, like, what really is gender, and so on?
Right.
Like, what is the log? Like, the log is not going to be there forever, and
Right.
it's really not even actually obstructing, at least in this experience that I witnessed, right? It wasn't obstructing the water, really. The water was happy to just keep going.
Well, right. And I think that another important component of that too is realizing that whenever we whenever we identify something and we say, for example, if I were comparing myself to someone else and saying, you know, you're really patient, what am I implying? I'm implying that I'm not as patient as you are. And so,
Okay.
because the metric for everything in life is a self comparison, really, when we
Oh
get
yeah.
into that realm of judgment. And so, those things that obstruct us in our minds are often our own judgments, but we think that we think we're judging other people, whether in a positive or negative light, whatever you want to say. But really, ultimately, we're only ever judging ourselves.
Right.
And whenever people realize that, it has this profound effect because you see that everything that you are consciously, judging other people and is actually just you talking about yourself, and it reveals how you see yourself, what light you see yourself in, and that has a huge impact because the implications are there, right? So it's like, oh, okay, if I'm actually just defining myself constantly by all of my judgments, then what is that definition looking like? And what kind of what kind of ego am I creating? Which goes into another conversation about the idea of the ego too, and how there's this negative connotation with the ego.
Right.
But ultimately, like that's from the occult perspective, the development of the cosmic ego is actually the purpose of creation, in the sense that what other purpose could conscious awareness have to exist other than to define itself and to be aware of itself? You know, so
Right.
those are all really important ideas for people to consider whenever they're thinking about life, or they're thinking about themselves, or they're thinking about others, or they're judging things or defining things. What does that say about me whenever I define this way?
Yeah. Yeah. What does it say about us? Especially when the judgment, as in most cases, is not from that viewing point, that sort of cosmic intelligence, when the judgment has, like, venom and poison in it, of, like, oh, this person's such a bastard, or, why does this person always do this? Like, that's so stupid. And, like,
Right,
all these
right,
kinds of things, rather than just saying, like, oh, I've observed that this person has a tendency to act in this manner. Like, and whatever that manner is, like, I've observed that this person has a tendency to, eat cereal for breakfast every day. Or I've observed that this person has a tendency to have, like, a short temper around these topics. Like, these are all observations, um, but the problem is most of us we start to make that observation, and then we get attached to that observation. Like we get attached to that perception of that person, and like we start to label it as like, this is good, this is bad, and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. But in reality, like the only person we are really accountable to is ourself. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
only person we have to live with is ourself.
That's right.
We forget that all the time. It's like other people's happiness or awareness or justice or whatever is not our responsibility, you know?
Well, right. I mean, ultimately, every situation calls you to make a judgment of yourself, right? And so,
Sure.
and there are some, I guess you could say, dangerous mindsets that people can get into, in which they say, everything is one, and so nothing ever needs to change,
Right.
in the sense that I don't need to do anything. And then you can
Sure.
get into apathy. I mean, I've been to these places, I visited them, I didn't live there, and I'm glad I didn't stay
Okay.
there. But I mean,
Yeah, me
I've
too. I'm
visited
glad you
these
didn't stay
places,
there.
and but it taught me a lot. And what I learned from it was that, um, even that, it in and of itself speaks to how I've just judged myself, right? And so, if I'm confronted with something, it's like a story I heard about the Dalai Lama. I was reading something, and
Mhm.
it was an excerpt from a book. Can't remember the name. And there was a group, and they were at dinner or lunch with the Dalai Lama, and they were discussing how one of the Buddhist members had started an ashram, and he was preying upon the female members, and for sex and things like that.
Yeah.
And they told the Dalai Lama that, they were doing their best to be compassionate toward him. They just didn't really know what to do in the situation, and they
Sure.
didn't want to do anything outside of compassion. And the Dalai Lama slammed his hand on the table loudly, and he said, "Compassion is important, but this has to stop."
Oh, good.
And
Yeah,
that
that's
was
awesome.
that was really meaningful to me, because what he was really saying in that moment was, um, whenever I see this, I see my own uh, you know definition of compassion, and my definition of compassion is broader than the definition of compassion that these people are bringing before me right now, in
Sure.
the sense that I'm seeing it from a higher perspective. And so in each moment, we have an opportunity to more clearly define ourselves and our own values. And if we see things in the world that we do not like,
Yeah.
uh, then it is our obligation to ourselves to act from our truth and not from anything else.
Right.
And so if I see someone abusing someone else, and that bothers me, it bothers me because I value kindness or compassion
Yeah.
or all of those other qualities. And if I don't do anything in that moment, what I'm really saying is I don't value those things very much.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's really well said. And the story reminds me too of when Yeshua bursts into that temple with those
Right.
gamblers and, basically whips them and drives them out like cattle. And, like to me, that's a great story of compassion, actually, because, um, compassion is not this like personal lovey-dovey, like,
Well, right.
superficial kindness, like you're saying. It's acting from the space of truth. It's honoring others. And sometimes when people are doing something that's unhealthy for both themselves and others, like, the compassion needs to meet the situation. It can't be this like idealistic version that a lot of people get caught up in and maybe confused by today. I think that, like, ultimately, like, we have to do something. Like if you see somebody, being abusive toward like a child or another person, like, and you feel compelled to stand up to them from that space of truth and, you know, cosmic knowing, so to speak, then you have to do it. And like, that's the right thing to do. That's compassion. And at the same time, going back to what I said right before your story, we're still not responsible for whether or not that abuser feels remorse, becomes compassionate themselves, learns a lesson, right? We're just doing what needs to be done, you know? And so I think that that's where the two ideas meet. It's not about like, oh, everything's one, so you just don't do anything, you know, because
Mhm.
that doesn't make any sense. That's just kind of a sophist idea, you know,
Yeah,
to
you have to honor your personal truth in that moment. It doesn't have to do with anyone else.
right.
You're doing it because you're saying this is who I am. It has nothing to do with anyone else in that situation, and it solely goes back to you. And I think that that's where things get unhealthy, is whenever people try to make it about something or someone other than themselves, because that's just simply not true. And whenever we lie to ourselves that way, we're doing a great disservice to ourselves and to to the entire universe,
Yeah.
right? Instead of just being honest and saying, I feel this way, and this is valid, and this is my truth right now, and I'm going to have the courage to honor my truth and to express myself from that place. And you know that also means that we have to recognize that some people's truths are not going to be in alignment with ours. But in essence, that's perfect too, because how we wouldn't have the opportunity to further define ourselves, to make our truth more clear, and to have that greater understanding if we didn't encounter conflict or tension or any of those things that people associate with evil, because evil itself as we know it is the force that drives evolution. And so we couldn't have any real growth without things that challenge us, and in the world that looks like a lot of things. And I mean, I have people say these things to me all the time. They're like, oh, well, everything is perfect, then why is all of this evil stuff happening in the world, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, you're looking at it from a certain perspective, and you're not actually looking at it the way that I am. The way that I'm looking at it is um, that isn't evil, because evil is a cop out. Good and evil and all these like vague words are just
Yeah.
cop outs for
Right.
they're not, they're stand-ins for true absolutes. And so instead of looking at something and saying, wow, that's evil, why don't we seek to understand what's happening and then to actually do something about it? I think that most
Right.
people most people use those hypothetical situations because they are afraid to truly explore those things, because
Yep.
they're afraid that they're going to see something in that reflects back to them an aspect of who they are, or they're simply afraid to truly affect change in the world because they feel powerless. But using
Yeah.
those words and saying good and evil and right and wrong and all these things doesn't actually help anyone, and it's not doing anything to really make change in the world. If you want to see people who are authentic, then look at what they're doing with their lives, not about what they're talking about. People talk about all kinds of stuff. We can see that in politics, but what are they doing?
Right. What are they doing? Yeah. There's a lot of complaining, a lot of pointing fingers,
Mm-hmm.
blame, things like this. And, you know, on both sides, I mean, we both tend to be more liberally minded, I think, you know, and, and so, you know, we probably share a lot of, we probably share a lot of political ideologies in common as well as the stuff we're talking about here, right? But at the same time, I'm sure you've also noticed that there are some like extreme, sort of extremist, very
Well, yeah,
divisive commentaries on the more liberal side that are
yeah,
actually just creating more of a wedge, just like the right wing is doing as well, or the more conservative, whatever we want to call it. It's really like, well, okay, like you guys, like you're both now just kind of
yeah. It's the
pointing the
same thing.
finger and blame. There's no mutual, like there's a wonderful story. this former like head or member, like high up member of the Ku Klux Klan, was telling this story about how this black
Oh, right.
reverend, like you've heard this, yeah, where like you know, no matter how much they tried to intimidate him, he would always just like respond with like laughter and humor and love. And so the best story is where they're like, they march into this diner where he's eating this chicken, and they go, boy, you better think twice about what you do to that chicken next, because what you do to that chicken, we're going to do to you. And he looks at the chicken, looks at them, and then kisses it. And
Oh,
all the
that's funny.
members of the Klan started laughing. Like they all broke up in laughter. And it's these kinds of things that eventually led to that Klan member doing a complete 180 and becoming liberated from, you know, that cycle of suffering that he was putting himself and others in and through, right? So, you know, it's just a great story because it's like, you know, blame and violence just begets more blame and violence. And
Yeah, and people get stuck in this mindset too. And I mean, and I can speak from personal experience where it's really easy to look back at your life and the situations you've experienced and feel harmed or wronged, and then develop a very intense and you could say justified victim mentality, because it's easy to slip into those things if you've
yeah,
experienced trauma.
yeah,
But but ultimately, if you become a victim and you are just wallowing in your misery, you're not actually helping yourself or anyone else.
right,
And what good is that doing you to be upset about something that, you know, that you're that really only exists in your mind anyway, and you're not experiencing in the current moment.
right.
And you're taking that and you're making an identity out of it, and it's an identity that's formed from your own pain,
Hmm.
but you're the only one who can actually alleviate your own suffering. And the only way that you can do that is to choose to see your life and yourself in a new light. But we see this in the world every day, in which people say, 10 years ago, this terrible thing happened to me, and this is who I am.
Yeah, I'll
And
never be over it, or I'll never be
right,
well, or whatever.
and and then they then become a martyr for a cause or something, and say, well, now I'm going to make anyone who I think is like this person who hurt me suffer. And ultimately, what they're doing is they're trying to give their pain to someone else, and they're trying to give their pain away. But that's usually not the answer. Usually what the answer is seeking to understand what the source of those things is, and then working to become a healer, in your own life primarily, and then
Hmm.
sharing that healing with others. And so,
Sure.
one good example of that would be, well, like what you shared there too, was like, the that minister, he could have been angry, he could have been upset at the injustices that he saw, and yet instead he chose to fight it with compassion. And that's usually the thing that does it, because people expect you to get upset whenever they're mean to you, because they're trying to get you upset, because they're trying to perpetuate their own ideas and biases and judgments. And when you don't get upset and you don't react from that place, but you do the opposite, then that's powerful. You're a person who is self-possessed. You're a powerful person. And, those forces that would oppose you are definitely threatened by you when you become that compassionate person, because that's the thing that undoes it. That's the thing that
Yeah.
can undo all of the chaotic energy in the universe, and set things in order is doing the thing that is opposite what that thing actually is. Because okay, I'm getting a little vague, so let me go back to a concept.
Yeah, sure, sure.
um,
Yeah,
I,
go ahead.
okay, so let me get back to a concept with this.
Okay.
It's like something we were kind of speaking about the other day, about removing yourself from the story and looking at the energy of it. Your story there is a great example. So let's say that that minister had actually become an angry vigilante who was just hell-bent on seeking retribution, from
Sure.
these clan members. Um, if you take the people out of the story, then and you look at the energy behind what they're doing and their agenda, if you have one angry person who's seeking to um, get someone, and then you have a group of people who are angry people who are seeking to get someone, what's the difference?
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
so
yeah.
there's no difference. It's the same energy operating through two different people in different ways, but it's the same thing. And people don't take the time to notice that, because they think, oh no, that's not who I am, because what I'm doing is the right thing. And it's like, but you're doing the same thing. Even if you're doing it from a different angle, you're still doing the same thing. And the only way that you can actually affect change is by doing the opposite of what you're doing or what that other thing is doing. So the only way that you can counteract hatred or vindictiveness is through compassion and
Sure.
mercy, because you can't throw a fire on a fire and
Yeah, and
expect it to
expects
put
it
it
to
out.
go out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good. I like that. That's really that's so funny to just think about, like, people trying to put out a fire by like adding more fire to it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's
Well,
what most people are doing.
yeah, it's true. Back to your thing about victims, a good friend of mine who's a psychologist taught me that there's a triangle, and it's victim, martyr, and perpetrator, and you always enter and exit through the victim portal. So a victim becomes a martyr, like, oh, I'm going to save everyone else, like that's like me, right? But that's acting from a place of fear more often than not, because it's like they feel like they've been wronged, they and so on, and so they go overboard, right? Then, and this is not always how it happens, but let's just hypothetically, like, they're not reaching people, they're not protecting people, they're not healing people, saving people, whatever, because they haven't done their own inner work, like you've been talking about. They haven't healed themselves, so how can they heal these other people? And so then they might become vindictive and start perpetrating, because they're not getting what they want. They're not dealing with the seed of the issue, right? So they start to become a perpetrator. It's the whole thing about how, like, abused children grow up, have children, and then abuse their children, and they're not even
Right.
aware that they're doing it. They don't even realize, like, oh my God, I'm saying exactly the same phrase to my kid that my dad or mom kept saying to me, that drove me totally insane. And and so the cycle just keeps perpetuating, and it just becomes a vicious circle, we might say, right? It's like, and then a downward spiral, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are so many of these different stories you could look at with other people's lives or even in your own life, and you can say, like, wow, I didn't realize what it really was. But if you take the time to break things down, and you take yourself out of this narrative that you've constructed, and instead you look at it from an energetic perspective, you can begin to understand that the energies we experience, we turn into stories instead of seeing it for what it really is. And that's probably the primary issue that we're facing as humans, is that attachment to a story. and a narrative, instead of actually seeing things for, in truth, in the light of truth.
Yeah, there's that just reminded me of there's this beautiful, wonderful song that like has really been important in my life called "Here for You" by this hip hop artist Idea, spelled Dia, and unfortunately he's not with us anymore. But yeah, it's a really beautiful song, and it encapsulates like all this stuff that we're talking about and all this wisdom of these these different traditions and whatnot. And yeah, there's a line in there where it's like he's talking about like how life's like a river and we're traveling down this river, and he says like the scenery we pass we'll never see again, so we store them up as memories and don't let go of them. And
Yeah.
then he says we're under a spell thinking that the river should go straight, so we set goals and desires to control our own fate. But the pain we experience is a result of our expectation, because it's the river's nature to twist and turn. This shit can burn. And like, and I'm not going to
This is
sing the
really
whole song.
good. I
Yeah,
like
I'm not going to sing the whole
this.
song, but I like know pretty much all the lyrics. And
Man, I've got to look this up later.
yeah, man, you'll love it. Anyway, like I just like that whole part is like it encapsulates everything that we've been talking about just now, and it so it popped into my head. And it's like, yeah, how true is that, right? Like we form these identities, these stories based upon these places we've seen and been. Like we're always trying to grab onto something, but the flow of the mind, and I mean like the mind as like the, not the individual mind only, but the cosmic mind, like the stuff of existence, right? It's always flowing. It's always just going where it goes naturally. And then, we're like, we get attached to those sticks in it, and so on, and those seed pods. And, these are our thoughts and feelings and everything else. And it's like, oh, this is my story. Like, this is who I am. And it's like, okay, but how is that working for you? How does
Well,
that work for any of us? And that's the question everyone has to ask themselves. Like, I'm not judging
one of the
anyone in particular. I'm just saying, like, how is that serving us?
one of the big highlights that I experienced through my journey of meditation was I reached a moment of realization that basically just the only way that I can describe it is it was as though all of my memories were erased. All of my memories were just erased.
Wow.
And I stopped having those experiences where things were triggering memories. And this really speaks to what you're talking to, but I feel like it's an important thing to discuss because in meditation, people don't know what are some like highlights or earmarks of the journey of a meditative practice. And one of those highlights that you reach is a point of blankness in which the light of awareness shines so brightly within you that it cleanses your mind. It cleanses your mind from the memories that you've been holding onto. Because what I realized from that experience was that my memories were actually just negative judgments that I'd been holding on to about myself, and all of those things that I saw as negative things in my past were really just areas in my life that I felt defined me as insufficient in some way. And I didn't understand that until I had these experiences. But then whenever I had that sudden flash within me that just kind of like burned away all of that stuff, I became aware that that's exactly what was happening. That every time I would have something trigger within me and think about so and so doing such and such to me, whenever that happened, what was really going on was me thinking about something and thinking about in that moment I wasn't enough in some way, and I was somehow flawed, and that there was something wrong with me. And this led me to understand the nature of what the Judeo-Christian world calls sin. And what sin really is, because in the Christian faith, Jesus is called the spotless sacrificial lamb, right? And so no blemish and no flaws. And what that really means, though, is that one, in order to release oneself from the idea of sin, which has so many connotations and is so misunderstood, the the real way that we release ourselves from the bondage of quote unquote sin is by releasing all of our judgments and attachments to the situations in life that we've experienced. And the only way to do that is to stop judging ourselves.
Yeah, really
And
well said.
and that's non-judgment. And that's what Buddha was talking about too.
Right.
And so when you realize that your judgments are the things that bind you and the things that imprison you, you realize suddenly, wow, I love myself too much to judge myself. And then you stop.
Wow, yeah, that's really beautifully put. I don't really think I have anything to add except just that for a lot of people don't know that the word sin really from its Greek roots means basically to miss the mark, like in archery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're
Yeah.
at a target and you miss, well, you don't sit there in archery, you don't sit there and go, oh my God, I missed and I'm so terrible and I suck and I'm never going to. No, you go and you pick it up and you do your best to hit it again, right? Until you hit it. So we get stuck just like the log in the water. We get stuck on this fact that, oh, there's a log in the water, or that I missed, right? It's like, just go pick up the damn arrow and try again. Just go remove the log. Like, it's not, there's nothing. We're judging ourselves. Like, we're our own judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah.
No one else is doing it to us, really.
Well, and if we wanted to come from an Eastern perspective, we would call this karma. And we would
Right.
say, well, what is karma? Karma is your judgments. And how all of your judgments lead to results and bear fruit in your life. And so in every moment, how we judge ourselves is leading us somewhere.
Right, because
And
that's an action.
That's right. And that's actually the only action we ever commit.
That's what karma means, action.
I
Right?
know.
So, I know, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mental, emotional, physical, all of it, right? Not just physical, like physiological muscle movement. It's all of it, right? So all of these thoughts, these judgments, like you're saying, these are actions. These are creating karmas and so on.
And I would say the only true action is your judgment. Everything else is a reaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely.
And that's what you ultimately get to with studying the yogic texts, is you realize, oh wow, there's only one action, and that is my judgment. Everything else is a reaction to what I have judged.
Right, and it all goes back to how the mind wants to label things and store these sceneries up as memories and not let go of them and so on, and that's all. And then that's the foundation for experiencing more and more separateness instead of more and more unity and flow and comradeship and compassion and all of that good stuff. So I think we just solved the mysteries of the universe, James.
Well, and then it gets a little boring sometimes. So it's like, okay, I'm 31, so now what do I do? But then you get to the positive aspects of this and you say, okay, so for most of my life, I was living in a place of negative judgment. So what would create a different experience for myself? And then it becomes obvious, oh, so now I can judge things in a different manner, and I can judge myself in a positive light. And that will create momentum and reactions that lead me to having an opposite experience from what I was having. And I think this is important to mention and to note, because a lot of times we get into discussing all of the things that is, quote unquote, wrong with people. But then we don't really talk about the things that people can do that can bring them greater joy or sense of fulfillment, right? And so the contrast to what we were just speaking about is changing your judgments, because when you realize that all of your negative judgments about the world and other people was really just about you and your sense of feeling powerless and insufficient, then you can stop doing that and you can start making positive judgments about the world and everyone else and really yourself. And what that does is it creates a life of beauty, and you can see your own beauty. And then you can look at life and say, wow, it is perfect, because now I know that I am perfect, because the only metric for perfection is however I define it. And that's true for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good, yeah, that's a good reminder of, like the way we see others is a reflection of the way we see ourselves and vice versa. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to be chewing on for the rest of the day probably. And it goes back to the golden rule, like no man is a true believer until he desires for his fellow man that which he desires for himself. And or treat others the way you want to be treated, however you want to put it. We need more golden rule happening, I think, in our lives and in our civilization and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that that's actually what everyone is doing. They just don't realize it. Um,
Sure, that's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point, actually. So I guess I should rephrase that, right? Like we need more conscious love, compassion, golden rule stuff going on, right? We need more to be an embodiment of those principles of truth and light and harmony in how we treat ourselves and treat others, because in fact we're not in any way separate.
right. No, we're not separate at all. And that leads us to the conversation about God. Yay. This is where I was like seeing this natural evolution of our conversation right now. And I was like, okay, now we can talk about God. And what
Cool.
does that mean? And I was like, yay, this is fun. I enjoy talking about this idea of God, which, ultimately God is an idea, because we're defining and
Right.
encapsulating something, as an archetype or whatever. And
Right.
so the qualities of divinity are omniscience, uh, omnipresence,
Mm.
omnipotence, transcendence, and is there another one? No, I think
Mm.
that's it. That
Yeah,
pretty
that
much covers it.
that pretty much covers it. Yeah.
And so let's get into these qualities for a second. So what does it mean to be? This is the easiest way to help people to change their perspective of God too, is to think of the idea of omnipresence. What could it mean to be present everywhere all at once? Uh, in light of divinity. Well, if you think about some divine being who is present everywhere all at once, omnipresent. And then you suddenly think, oh, well, if something is present everywhere all at once, then that must mean that that same thing must be present within every single space, cell, molecule, and atom, and every energy that exists in the
Right.
universe, including me. And
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, wow, wait a minute. So everything is this one thing, because there's no other possibility. If this thing
Mhm.
exists, then it must be everything. And then someone mentioned to me, well, yes, but God is omnipresent, but also transcendent. And so God is present everywhere, but transcends everything all at once. And I was like, and they were asking me, how could that possibly be? And I said, well, that's obvious. It's very obvious. It's the same way that you and I live our lives every day, that we are the creator of our thought world. We are the thinker. We are present in our thought world every moment, in every aspect of it, but we are not our thoughts.
Right. Oh, that's very well said. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
And so, therefore, in the entire universe itself, God is omnipresent as the thinker, and all of creation is the thoughts of the creator. And so that's how God is both omnipresent and transcendent.
Yeah.
And that's how we're made in the image of God, as the holy text would say, and that we are omnipresent in our thought world, but we transcend our thoughts because we're the thinker and not the thoughts themselves.
Right. Yeah, and that reminds me of a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which I'm just gonna have to paraphrase, but it's like having pervaded myself, or sorry, having pervaded the universe with a fraction of myself, yet I remain. And like I've
Mm,
always really loved that.
yeah, exactly. And so, you know, um, like from the Hermetic text, it says the all is in all, and but all is not the all. And so it's like, well, what does that
Okay.
really mean? Or, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's the
Sure.
same. It's the same thing, that the all is the universal mind, the universal mind that is the thinker, the observer,
Yeah.
and anything that is not the thinker or the observer is not the all. The only thing that can exist is the all itself, which is the mind, the universal mind, the universal consciousness. And
Right.
so each of us, intrinsically is that. And the only thing that could ever separate us from, quote unquote, God or divinity or universal mind is thinking that we are separate, because
Right.
the creator separates himself from himself or herself through their own thoughts. And
Yeah.
that's the only way that it could ever be so, because if the creator is omnipotent, the only way that the creator could overpower the creator is by thinking that they are not what they really are. That's what someone said last night. They were like, well, how could we possibly be God if we have so many limitations? And I told him, I said, I
Like
I,
that.
I told him, I said, the reason that people can be God but not experience it is because they don't believe in themselves. And a person who doesn't believe in themselves is like God being an atheist.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. There was a wonderful story I've heard a few times that I wanted to share from this yogini, Hilda Charlton, who's not nearly as well known as like some other major yogis from the 20th century, but she was truly a wonderful being and um, had a lot of great things to say. But yeah, according to my friend who knew her very well, she said once, you have to give up to get to God, you have to give up religion, and then you have to give up your concept of God. Or basically she was saying, I'm not doing a great job of telling it, but it's like she was saying like what she was really saying actually in the story was that, but a little different. She said they say that the last thing you have to give up before you become whatever, enlightened, Buddha, whatever, is the concept of a God. And then she said, but when I looked in the mirror at a certain age and realized I no longer had a dancer's body, that was so much harder than giving up the concept of God.
Yeah,
And I love that story because you have this great yogini, and like it's funny because we we get so stuck on this concept of God, but it's just another concept. It's a word,
yeah,
an idea. Theology arises out of it. People argue over it and so on. But when it comes down to it, like the true seeds of our limitations are things like I no longer have a dancer's body, or I no longer um, can like do that pole vault that I did when I was young, or whatever it is, for each and every person. I
it's
mean,
a comparison, right?
yeah, it's amazing because a lot of us, a lot of us can get behind this idea that, well, I won't say a lot of us, but more of us these days can get behind this non-dual idea that like there really is no God. It's just a concept and everything is God. And therefore we're God, we're one with God or whatever. But yeah, it's really like, even that's just conceptual until you really deal with
It
the
has to
true
be
seeds.
experienced.
Yeah, it has to be experienced. And until you really deal with the true seeds or roots of your own limitations and suffering, right? It doesn't matter how many times you talk about everything's God and God's just a concept. It doesn't matter, because if you're not living in that, if you're not existing as that piece of wisdom, then you're still existing in a limited frame of being.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to realize too that anytime we define ourselves, we limit ourselves in some way.
Right.
Because if I'm going to choose an identity for myself, and I'm also choosing a set of limitations that correspond to that identity, and so and that's not necessarily bad, but it's more along the lines of realizing that those things have to be temporary experiences and never to become attached to any of them. You can choose that as a component of your experience. Like, for example, if you decide to take up gardening and become a gardener, um, now, if that just is what you fully identify with or whatever, that's going to encapsulate your sense of self, and you're going to limit yourself because you're going to say, oh, well, um, I didn't plant vegetables this year, so I'm not really a gardener anymore. And then you're going to experience low self-esteem or something.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, no. What are you doing right now? That's who you are right now. And that's something that helped me a lot. Was I realized that I have to be in touch with what my truth is right now, because that's the only truth that matters,
Right.
not any other sense of identity. And so whatever I'm choosing for myself right now is the essential thing, and everything else is something else.
Definitely.
And so people say things like, I'm a musician, and it's like, oh, really? Did you play music today? Did you think about music today? And it's like, well, if the answer is no, then you're not really a musician. You just like to think of yourself in that way.
Right.
But why do we have to say I'm a musician instead of saying I enjoy playing music, or I enjoy music, or etc., right? Because creating an identity around something that you enjoy doing isn't really truth, right?
Yeah.
We could do this with everything, right? Like astrology. That's why all of these different labels. Could I say I'm an astrologer? Yeah, I could, but what does that entail? That means that um, is that what's consuming every moment of my waking time? Am I just, is that my one thing that I'm always thinking about and that brings me intense joy in every moment? No, it's not. And I would be lying if I said that's true. So am I really an astrologer? I guess I'm not. Not really, not in that sense. But you know what? I would say that most people aren't. And that's true for everything in life. You can't really say that you're any one thing in particular, because you'd be lying to yourself, because you're not consumed by passion with that thing every waking moment of your life. And
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
this goes back to the idea that which is put beautifully at the end of Hermann Hesse's book Siddhartha, that basically all truths are expressed in language and thought and so on are but half truths, right?
mhm, yeah,
All all basically the opposite becomes just as true, like once you put something into words, in a sense. And so like language is a very fickle mistress. It's a very unruly bedfellow. It will betray us time and time again. And so that's why it's so important for all of us to really tune into the energy behind what a person is saying or doing in any way, because that's all that really matters, because I can sit here and say I'm a guitarist, right? And another person could say the exact same words, but if I'm saying it with like no real attachment energetically to that statement, then there's nothing wrong there, really. There's nothing I shouldn't say wrong, but there's nothing that's going to hold me to that. But if some other person says that same phrase, I'm a guitarist, and really identifies as that, and really, like get like huffs and puffs over that or whatever, then, there's an energy of attachment to that statement and that identity. And therefore it becomes another stick in the river, or becomes, and so on.
Well, I actually really enjoy like fucking with people sometimes because I think that it's important to question ourselves and to question others whenever they get into those spaces. And whenever someone's really, really serious about something that they said that they are, I like to ask them, well, what does that mean to you? And
Okay.
I feel like that brings people to good places, because if someone comes up to you and they're just really insistent about this thing in their life, and that this is who they are and this identity they've created for themselves, as being this important whatever it is that they are in their mind. And you say, okay, well, you say that you're this, but what does that mean? Can you tell me what that means, to you? And that makes people think, oh, I say that I'm this. What does that mean to me? And that actually brings about more of a true experience for a person than them just simply going through life defining themselves, right?
Sure.
So it could be anything. You could be. I really like the astrology analogy, because I've met quite a lot of people who are very serious about being an astrologer, and how um, they're very important because they're such an
Oh my
astrologer, right?
gosh. Yep. I'm
And
interested
so
too.
and that sense of importance, which I'm speaking about myself at one point in my life too, right? And I
Sure.
recognize that, in saying it. But that sense of importance is coming from somewhere. And so it's like, well, okay, I see that this is something very important to you. So what does it mean to you when you say that? What does that mean? I'm an astrologer. Um, and then, you get different answers. And I think that what people will find when they begin to question themselves in that light and say, I say that I'm this, what does that mean? When I say that, what are the implications of me saying this? And
Right.
then you begin to realize that this is totally subjective, that your definition is subjective, and that there's no objective definition for anything. And my idea of being this is totally different from your idea of being this. And my idea of being this is no greater than your idea of being this. And we can't compare the two, because this is just mine and that's just yours. And they exist side by side, but there's no comparison, because it's my creation and it's not really who I am. I'm not really an astrologer. This is just something that I've created as part of my persona, or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think it's good to question people too. Something I've learned in doing that, though, is that we have to tune in and see if the person is ready to go there, or to hear that kind of truth in that moment. A lot of people are not necessarily always in a space where they can receive, questions like that and whatnot. And
Well,
so
it depends. I don't know. It just depends on how much energy I have that day.
Well, I guess that's fair. Yeah, a good friend of mine
I'm just
once.
joking.
Oh, okay. Okay, a good friend of mine once said, like, like there's, you want to speak the truth, but then you're actually negating the truth you speak, even if it's true, if you also sense that that person like is not ready to hear it, or it's not really appropriate. Let's say this is not, if it's not appropriate energetically for you to say it, like let's get out of the dimension of judging another person, saying, well, they're not ready to hear it. It's like,
But I think that's the problem.
the energy
But
just doesn't call for it right now, so I'm
but
not going to say it, because it wouldn't be in service of that truth that I would be speaking, so it would actually negate itself.
actually, like, and I was really joking about this idea of fucking with people, because it's not really that.
I figured,
Like,
yeah.
it's more just like, I feel that it's compassionate um, to help people to inquire within, and so that's why I do that. But
Sure.
I actually have to say that I disagree a little bit with what you just said about this idea of being appropriate or whatever. I really feel like it's more about your own intention for why you're doing it, and if your
That's
intention,
fair. Yeah.
if you look at it from that perspective, you realize, wait a minute, what's my intention right here? Why do I want to say this to this person?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then you can actually get to a real answer, instead of some vague notion of, oh, the cosmic energy is opposed to me doing this. No, it's not. You're just lying to yourself right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's what it like, yeah, why are you going to say this thing in the first place? Are you saying it
Right.
for quote unquote, like from that space of truth, from that space of compassion, highest good and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Or are you
And
just saying it to be a shit, which I've definitely fallen into that latter category quite a bit. So I do my best to be vigilant about this. And
well, it's like,
yeah.
are you wanting to say this to this person because you want to extend compassion to them, or you just or you want to hurt them, or you want
Right.
to
Is it
call
about
them,
you? Yeah.
call them out? Well, no, I mean, it always goes back to you.
It always goes
And
back to you,
so,
but I mean like the you that's like, oh well, I just want to show like how much I know, or like I want to
yeah,
like
that's right.
or like that kind of ego, or whatever you want to call it, that level of
Unconscious
yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I have a baby hanging out in my house, so
I think that's amazing. I love babies.
okay, cool. Yeah, that's what's going on in the background there. We got some
I know I kept hearing that, and I was like, oh, yay, babies.
yeah, we got some cosmic joy in the background of our
Yeah,
conversation. So
babies are the best. They're my favorite.
cool.
Yeah, I love babies. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was, getting at was, where are you coming from within yourself? Are you coming from an unconscious place that you're not aware of? Um, someone, it's always like this motivation of, what about this person setting me on edge, and so I need to set them straight, and it's like, no, what's really going on
Yeah.
is, like, you don't really understand why this is bothering you, and you feel the need to call someone out, but really it's because you don't know yourself, and you're experiencing pain through your interactions with this person. And so it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with your own pain and your own unconscious process,
Yeah.
and you haven't faced it. And so then it's a moment of reflection, and it says, whoa, why do I feel the need to say X, Y, and Z to this person, and feel like I need to there was a quote I read the other day that I found very meaningful, and it said, I'm not here to teach anyone. I'm here to love. I'm here to love. Love will teach them.
Yeah, that's great. I like
And I
that
was
a
like,
lot.
yeah, I love that. It was so perfect, because it was just such a beautiful statement, because it was like, yeah, that's so true. It's really that compassionate energy that teaches us everything. It's never the person who's coming to us trying to teach us something, because really what they're doing
Yeah.
is they're trying to fix themselves through you, and they don't even know it.
Yeah, cool. Wow. Really well said. Well, I think we should
Yeah.
wrap it up here. It's been a really great discussion. I just wanted to say briefly, we both kind of have like I feel like we both have some similar things going on with like Venus in our charts and even the North Node. And, they're slightly subtly different placements, but I think it's like, yeah, we both kind of, you can see it in our charts. Like we have this quest to understand and really embody like true love and whatnot. So I think that's just something I just kind of thought about at this very tail end, thinking about our charts. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Understanding compassion is important
Yeah,
to me. To me,
definitely. Yeah. And embodying it and acting from it and all that stuff. So, well, cool, man. It was really fun having you on here. And, you know, uh, is there some place that people can find you if they're interested in reaching out?
yeah. I mean, like, I mean, my personal email address is James Wade, JamesWade 1988 at gmail.com. They can find me on Facebook.
Great.
James David Wade is my name. And those are two ways in which people could reach out to me if they wanted to get in touch and whatnot. So I do some energy work with people and help people with
Cool.
meditation and healing and all kinds of things like that, astrology.
Yeah.
So
Great. Wonderful. Yeah. And James and I are Facebook friends, and so you can always, find him through me as well. And, also don't forget to check out some of the links I'm going to have in the description to my website and the work I do. And, please hit like and share and all that good stuff. And, spread the word, spread the love, be blessed and all that stuff. Om Tat Sat. And thanks again, James.
thank you, Lars.